Hello guys, and welcome to my preview and predictions for the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix. Before I get underway though, I need to give you a quick warning that this is a sprint race weekend, so make sure that you're tuning in on Friday night because you don't want to miss out on that qualifying. But without further ado, let's get into a little recap of what happened last week at the Mexican Grand Prix. So obviously we saw Ferrari having an absolutely banging weekend, Carlos Sainz in particular running away with the victory in the end after overtaking Max Verstappen, having lost the lead off the start of the race. He absolutely dominated the entirety of the weekend, which was so impressive, and potentially what could be his last ever race win, because who knows what the performance of the Williams is going to be like next year and beyond. And then we had Sergio Perez dropping possibly one of the worst home race performances I've ever seen in Formula 1. His qualifying was poor, he was out in Q1, started outside of his grid box, so got a 10-second penalty, then got into a fight with Liam Lawson, which gave him damage, so he was done for the rest of the race. Ended up coming home in P17. Just a horrible weekend for him at his home race, especially given the conditions right now for him. He needs to be performing at the top of his game right now if he's got any chance for a Red Bull seat for next year, or even just on the grid as a whole. And then of course we cannot talk about the Mexican Grand Prix in 2024 without mentioning that 20-second Max Verstappen penalty. His incidents with Norris, the stewards gave a 20-second penalty to. However, the way that I saw it, to be honest, the turn 4 incident where Verstappen pushed Norris wide and Norris went over the grass, you kind of just see that at that corner a lot of the time, so I felt like the penalty was pretty harsh there. 10 seconds in particular is a very stern penalty for that one. I would have maybe given that a 5 or even nothing because we just see that all the time. As for the second move, and definitely the worst of the two, I feel like the 10-second penalty was probably fair for that one. He did just dive it down the inside at a turn that you never see a move, and then ran himself and Norris off the road. And moving into Brazil this weekend, we certainly have seen our fair share of Max Verstappen controversy there, thinking back to 2021 where he just essentially did the same thing to Hamilton that he did to Norris last weekend. So it'll be interesting to see if he's in amongst it again this weekend. As for my predictions for the Mexican Grand Prix, you can see the overview here. It's not as bad as it looks, I want to say, especially in qualifying. I don't know if I'm just sipping down on that copium or something, but I think I actually did okay. If you look at it, I got Russell correct, and then I just needed to swap round the Ferraris and swap round Norris and Verstappen, and then I had it bang on. As for the race though, whilst I got Norris and Leclerc bang on, I couldn't be more wrong about Sergio Perez in 5th. He finished, of course, in 17th. Piastri 4th, well, he didn't have a great race either, ended up 8th. And then Verstappen, 20 seconds of penalties. If he still managed to win after that, then it would have been absolutely wonderful. So overall, I will be looking to do a little bit better this weekend. Speaking of this weekend at the Brazilian Grand Prix, let's have a look at the track itself. Normally, we do see banger races here. I have to say, it's probably one of my favourite tracks on the calendar, especially that turn 1, 2, 3 complex. You can see so many moves into there. Late braking moves down the inside into turn 1 or round the outsides. There's so many that you can go for into there. However, the issue with making the move in turn 1 is that you've got the long run down to turn 4. If the car behind can stay close, then they can make a re-overtake into turn 4 a lot of the time. So you see a lot of ding-dong battles going on there. We absolutely love to see it. The track then moves into the more technical infield section, lots of off-camber corners, tight corners. I feel like qualifying is generally won and lost in that middle sector. However, in the race it can be tough to follow through there. And then of course the final corner into the back straight itself. Sometimes people make moves into the final corner. It's obviously difficult to overtake there because you do just get re-overtaken on the long straight after. And of course with the last straight itself, we often see runs up to the line where on the final lap of the race you never know who's going to come out on top between two drivers, and it can be really exciting to see. As for last year's race, we also had a sprint race weekend. The sprint race in particular, it was essentially just Max Verstappen dominance, Lando Norris coming home in P2. Though I'd say the main talking points of the sprint race were the fact that the Ferrari and the Mercedes were in a battle with Alpha Tauri for the whole race weekend. Of course, renamed RB now. But that was really interesting to see Yuki Tsunoda having a great weekend last year. As for the actual race itself, on the formation lap, Charles Leclerc had a mechanical fault that saw him out of the entire race. And the Verstappen and Norris out front battle somewhat continued into the race. Norris did have a look at Verstappen at one point in the race, but then after that sort of fell back, ended up finishing 8 seconds off the lead. But the main talking point of the main race last year was a Fernando Alonso masterclass to keep hold of the podium positions, with Sergio Perez coming up on his tail into the closing stages of the race in one of the most dominant cars we've ever seen in Formula 1. Fernando Alonso managed to keep him behind with some excellent car placement, probably one of the most enthralling ends to a race I've seen in my time watching Formula 1. They came across the line with only 5/100ths between them, but Fernando Alonso on that day managed to hold on to the podium spectacularly. So moving into this weekend in particular and my predictions for it. One of my mantras in life is that you have to be bold to be beautiful. And so for this qualifying prediction, I am putting Nico Hülkenberg in 5th place. The Haas team have been gaining momentum over these last couple of races. Hülkenberg has been generally in really good form in qualifying, other than last race where Kevin Magnussen out-qualified him. So he's going to come back with vengeance, and I kind of see the Mercedes being a bit slower in qualifying, so he's going to manage to outperform them. Then in P4, I've gone for Max Verstappen. I feel like the Red Bull's car still isn't quite as good as the Ferrari and the McLaren, but Verstappen's still going to have a solid qualifying coming home in P4. And then in P3, I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri. I think he really needs to get a good qualifying in because he's been struggling as of late, and this is going to be the one that he does it on. And then in 2nd place, I'm going to go for Lando Norris. He obviously needs to keep performing to keep these championship hopes alive, and I do believe that he will in this qualifying session. He has been qualifying pretty well recently. And then for pole position, I'm going to keep going with the Ferrari hype that they've been building up recently. I'm going to say that Charles Leclerc is going to come home and get that pole position after his teammate Carlos Sainz got it last week. And then for the race itself, I'm going to go for Lewis Hamilton in P5. I think obviously Nico Hülkenberg, if he does manage to qualify in the top 5, he'll probably drop back in the race. I see Hamilton picking up the pieces. And then in P4, I'm going to go for Oscar Piastri, kind of consolidating on a decent qualifying performance, but dropping behind Max Verstappen in P3, who, as we have seen throughout his entire career, always tends to have decent race pace, is very strong at the Brazilian Grand Prix, as we've seen in the past. So I see him finishing in P3 behind the top 2, where in P2 I see Lando Norris converting his 2nd place in qualifying into the race, which means for the race win, after taking pole position, I am going to say that Charles Leclerc completes the clean sweep this weekend. I think that, of course, Ferrari have been incredibly strong recently. Charles Leclerc was outdone by Carlos Sainz last week, so I see him bouncing back. And you might be wondering, where is Carlos Sainz in these predictions? I don't know. I kind of feel like he's just got that win and now he's going to take his foot off the gas. Maybe I'm being a bit cynical here, but yeah, I've omitted Carlos Sainz, don't shoot me. And if you enjoyed the vibes of this video and you want to see some more content on this channel, make sure to click here to see my driver ratings for last week's race at Mexico.